You have no choice, Lyra. The agreement has already been signed. Harrison Harrington's voice cut through the silence of their Upper East Side apartment like a blade. Despite its opulent appearance, crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, and artwork that had once been the envy of New York society, the space felt hollow, much like the family's finances. Lyra Harrington stood by the window overlooking the city lights, her slender fingers trembling against the cold glass. At 24, she had never imagined her life would come to this, being traded like a commodity to save her father from financial ruin. "You're selling me." The words felt foreign on her tongue. Not a question, but a stark realization. Harrison loosened his silk tie, avoiding his daughter's gaze. "Nathaniel Rothwell has agreed to forgive our debt in exchange for your hand in marriage. The wedding will take place in 3 weeks." The Rothwell? The man they call the Wolf of Wall Street. Lyra turned, her dark hair falling across her pale face. "Father, he's known for destroying companies and lives without remorse. And now he holds our lives in his hands." Harrison drained his whiskey glass. "He could have destroyed us completely, taken everything. Instead, he's offered this arrangement." The winter sun cast long shadows across the room as Lyra processed the news. She had spent her life sheltered from the world, homeschooled, rarely allowed beyond their social circle, her only companions the piano in the corner and the books that lined the walls. "Why me? He could have any woman in New York." Harrison's laugh held no humor. "This isn't about desire, Lyra. It's about leverage, about old debts being settled." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Marcus, Lyra's older brother. He entered with his usual confident stride, but his eyes betrayed concern when they landed on his sister. "So you told her," he said to their father, his voice tight. "She needed to know? The contract has been finalized." Marcus crossed the room to Lyra, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I tried to find another way, sis. I've been working every connection I have." And hope flickered briefly in her eyes. "Rothwell won't budge. He wants this specific arrangement or nothing." Lyra moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "What happens if I refuse?" The silence that followed told her everything. Her father finally spoke. "The Harrington name will be dragged through every courtroom and newspaper in the country. Your brother's career will be over before it begins. Everything, this apartment, your trust fund, our remaining assets, gone. And you still don't see that this is strange?" Lyra turned, a fire in her eyes that rarely showed. "A man like Nathaniel Rothwell doesn't need a wife. Why not just take everything? Why this arrangement?" Marcus and Harrison exchanged a glance that didn't escape Lyra's notice. "There's more to this, isn't there?" she pressed. Harrison sank into an armchair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. "There's history between the Rothwells and Harringtons that precedes you, Lyra. Old wounds." "What kind of history?" "The kind that's better left buried." Harrison stood abruptly. "You've always done what's best for this family. I need you to do this one last thing." Lyra felt the familiar weight of expectation settle on her shoulders, the same weight that had kept her obedient and dutiful her entire life. Her phone buzzed with a message from Phoenix, her only true friend. "What's happening?" "You vanished from our coffee date." Before she could respond, the doorman announced an arrival. "Mr. Harrington, there's a package for Miss Lyra." The delivery was a simple white box, no card, no sender information. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a vintage diamond engagement ring. Beneath it, a handwritten note in elegant script. "I'll see you at the altar. N.R." The presumption made her blood run cold. "He doesn't even ask," she whispered. "Just commands." Harrison cleared his throat. "You'll meet him tomorrow evening. He's requested your presence at his penthouse to discuss the terms." "Terms? As if I'm a business acquisition." In his world, Lyra, everything is a transaction. Harrison's voice softened slightly. "Just be grateful he's allowing you to enter as his wife rather than seeing us destroyed." Lyra slipped the ring back into its box. "And if I go through with this, what then? Am I supposed to be his wife in every sense?" Marcus winced, but Harrison continued without emotion. "The contract stipulates a proper marriage. After 1 year, if both parties agree, it can be dissolved with certain financial provisions for you." "So I'm not just being sold," Lyra said, her voice hollow. "I'm being rented." Harrison flinched at her words. "This is temporary. 1 year of your life to save everything we've built." Lyra moved to the hallway, pausing at the family portrait that hung there. Her mother's serene smile frozen in time, taken just months before the cancer took her. What would she think of this arrangement? "Do I have until tomorrow to decide?" she asked quietly. "There's nothing to decide, Lyra," Harrison replied, his voice regaining its edge. "This is happening. The Harrington name will survive, one way or another." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Lyra heard Marcus confronting their father. "This is wrong and you know it," Marcus hissed. "Rothwell isn't after our money. He's after revenge. And you're giving him exactly what he wants." "You think I don't know that?" Harrison snapped back. "But what choice do we have? He owns enough of our debt to destroy us 10 times over." Lyra closed her bedroom door, shutting out their voices. She moved to her window, gazing at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Nathaniel Rothwell was waiting. The man who would become her husband. The man who might destroy what remained of her family. She opened her laptop, searching his name. The screen filled with images of a striking man with piercing gray eyes and a face that rarely smiled. Articles detailed his ruthless business tactics, his solitary existence, his calculated rise to power. What she couldn't find was any explanation for why such a man would want a sheltered, inexperienced woman like her as his wife. Unless Marcus was right, this wasn't about marriage at all. This was about revenge. Nathaniel Rothwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Central Park penthouse, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. The skyline had changed dramatically since his childhood in Brooklyn, where he'd watched his father struggle to keep their small investment firm afloat against ruthless competitors like Harrison Harrington. Behind him, his assistant Julian cleared his throat. "The contracts have been delivered to the Harringtons as requested, sir. Miss Harrington will be here at 7 tomorrow evening." Nathaniel didn't turn. "And the investigation?" "Complete. Everything you wanted to know about Lyra Harrington." Julian placed a thick folder on the glass desk. 24 years old. Homeschooled. Graduated from Juilliard with honors in piano performance, but never pursued a professional career. Rarely appears in public except for charity events with her father. No known romantic relationships. An heiress with no interest in her inheritance, Nathaniel mused. "Interesting. Sir, if I may." Julian hesitated. "This arrangement seems unusual, even for strategic purposes. The Harrington assets would be yours without marriage." Nathaniel finally turned, his gray eyes cold. "Some debts can't be measured in dollars, Julian." Left alone, Nathaniel opened the folder. Photographs of Lyra Harrington showed a woman with dark hair and reserved poise, nothing like the socialites who typically circulated in his world. Something in her eyes reminded him of his father, the same quiet dignity he'd maintained even as Harrison Harrington systematically destroyed their company and reputation. Nathaniel rolled up his sleeve, revealing the scar on his left wrist, a permanent reminder of the night he'd found his father dead in his study. The note beside him explaining how Harrison Harrington had fabricated evidence of fraud, turning investors and authorities against them. "The final move, father," Nathaniel whispered. 15 years in the making. He closed the folder and crossed to his private bar, pouring a glass of scotch. The wedding would complete his decade-long strategy to dismantle everything Harrison Harrington had built. And what better way to do it than to take the one thing the man actually seemed to value: his daughter. Across town in a Brooklyn loft apartment, Phoenix Quinn paced as Lyra sat motionless on the couch. "This is insane, Lyra. People don't arrange marriages like this anymore, especially not to men like Nathaniel Rothwell." Lyra smoothed her skirt, a habit from childhood. "Apparently they do when there's enough money involved." Phoenix ran her fingers through her short, dyed blue hair. "You can't seriously be considering this. The man's a predator. They call him the Wolf of Wall Street for a reason. I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Run away. Stay with me. We'll figure something out." Lyra shook her head. "And leave my father and brother to face financial ruin? The scandal would destroy Marcus's political career before it even begins." Phoenix threw her hands up. "So you're just going to sacrifice yourself? Become some trophy wife to a man who probably sees you as another acquisition?" A tear slipped down Lyra's cheek. 1 year. That's all I need to endure. Then the contract allows for dissolution if both parties agree. And you believe he'll just let you go? Phoenix sat beside her friend. "Men like Rothwell don't give up what belongs to them." "I don't belong to anyone," Lyra whispered. Phoenix squeezed her hand. Then why are you acting like you do? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Phoenix had never understood Lyra's sense of duty to her family. How could she, when her own parents had encouraged her independence from childhood? I meet him tomorrow, Lyra finally said. At his penthouse. I'm coming with you. The invitation was for me alone. Phoenix snorted. Then I'll wait in the lobby. No way are you going into the wolf's den by yourself. Later that night, as Phoenix drove her home, Lyra watched the streets of New York blur past the car window. How many times had she dreamed of escaping the golden cage of her upbringing, of experiencing life on her own terms? And now, just as she'd gathered the courage to suggest moving out, this arrangement had emerged to bind her tighter than ever. At home, she found her father in his study, surrounded by papers. Financial statements, legal documents, remnants of the empire that was slipping through his fingers. You should sleep, she said from the doorway. Harrison looked up, startled. Just making sure everything's in order for tomorrow. Are you going to tell me what really happened between our families? Harrison removed his reading glasses. Ancient history. Not ancient enough for Nathaniel Rothwell to forget. Lyra entered the room, picking up a framed photo of her mother. Did it have something to do with Mom? A flash of something, guilt, crossed her father's face. Your mother was the only pure thing in my life. Don't tarnish her memory with speculation. Lyra set down the photo. I deserve to know why I'm being sacrificed. You're not being sacrificed, Harrison snapped. You're saving this family, as your mother would have wanted, by marrying a man who hates us. He doesn't hate you. He doesn't even know you. But he hates you, Lyra pressed. Why? Harrison turned away. Business creates casualties, Lyra. The Rothwells were one of many. That's not good enough. It's all you're getting tonight. Harrison's tone signaled the end of the conversation. Be ready at 6 tomorrow. We're something appropriate. First impressions matter. In her room, Lyra opened her laptop again, digging deeper into the Rothwell family history. Articles mentioned the suicide of Richard Rothwell 15 years ago, following accusations of financial fraud that were never proven. His son, just 20 at the time, had inherited the remains of Rothwell Investments and methodically transformed it into a powerhouse. The pieces began to align. This wasn't just about money. It was about a vendetta that had been brewing for over a decade. On impulse, Lyra searched for images of Richard Rothwell. The resemblance to his son was striking. The same angular features, the same penetrating gaze. But Richard's eyes held a warmth that seemed absent in Nathaniel's. As dawn broke over New York, Lyra finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of wolves circling ever closer, and of a man with cold gray eyes waiting to claim what he believed was owed. The historic chapel of St. Mary's on Martha's Vineyard glowed with the light of 1,000 candles. Outside, the Atlantic crashed against the rocky shore, but inside, the only sound was the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon as guests filled the pews. Lyra stood alone in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection. The vintage lace gown had belonged to her mother, ivory and timeless, with pearl beading that caught the light. 3 weeks had passed in a blur of preparations and legal documents. She had met Nathaniel Rothwell exactly twice, once at his penthouse for a coldly civil discussion of terms, and once for the engagement announcement at the Plaza Hotel. Both encounters had left her with the same impression. He viewed their marriage as a business merger, nothing more. A knock at the door preceded Phoenix's entrance. Her friend had abandoned her usual edgy style for an elegant bridesmaid's dress, though she couldn't resist adding blue highlights to her updo. Your father's ready, Phoenix said, then lowered her voice. We could still make a run for it. My car's outside. Lyra smiled faintly. You know I can't. Then at least take this. Phoenix pressed something into Lyra's palm, a small silver key. It's to my apartment. If things get bad, really bad, you use it. No questions asked. Nothing will happen to me. You don't know that. Phoenix's eyes filled with uncharacteristic tears. I've been reading about him, Lyra. The man's ruthless. In business, maybe. Lyra tucked the key into her garter. But this arrangement is simple. We marry, live separately, maintain appearances for a year, then divorce. Phoenix didn't look convinced. Just promise you'll call me. Every day. The wedding coordinator appeared at the door. It's time, Miss Harrington. Lyra took a deep breath, adjusted her veil, and stepped into the hallway where her father waited. Harrison Harrington looked distinguished in his tuxedo, but the lines around his eyes had deepened in recent weeks. "You look like your mother," he said, voice thick. "Would she approve of this?" Lyra asked. Harrison's jaw tightened. She would understand sacrifice. The church doors opened. Lyra gripped her father's arm as they began the long walk down the aisle. Faces turned to watch. New York's elite, financial power brokers, political figures, all witnesses to the merger of two dynasties. And at the altar, waiting with perfect stillness, stood Nathaniel Rothwell. He wore a tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his tall, lean frame. His dark hair was immaculately styled, his posture commanding. But it was his eyes that caught Lyra's attention, gray and cold as winter steel, until they met hers. For just a moment, something flickered in those depths, surprise, perhaps, or something unreadable. A strange tremor seemed to pass through him as she approached, so subtle that Lyra thought she might have imagined it. Then his expression settled back into polite indifference. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. They exchanged vows in clear, emotionless voices. When the time came to exchange rings, Nathaniel's fingers brushed against hers, cool and dry. If he noticed her slight trembling, he gave no indication. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister announced to polite applause. "You may kiss the bride." Lyra braced herself. This would be their first physical contact beyond handshakes. Nathaniel lifted her veil with unexpected gentleness, revealing her face fully to him. Again, that strange flicker in his eyes, quickly suppressed. His lips touched hers briefly, formal, chaste, yet somehow causing her heart to skip a beat. Then it was over. They turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Rothwell. At the reception in the oceanfront estate Nathaniel had rented for the occasion, Lyra stood beside her new husband, accepting congratulations from guests she barely knew. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, proprietary but not intimate. "Smile," he murmured when the photographers approached. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of your life." Lyra managed a practiced smile. "I didn't realize you cared about appearances." "Everything is about appearances," he replied smoothly, raising his champagne in response to a toast. Across the room, Lyra spotted her brother Marcus in intense conversation with Nathaniel's aunt, Vivian Rothwell, a striking woman in her 60s with silver hair and the same penetrating gray eyes as her nephew. "Your brother seems concerned," Nathaniel observed, following her gaze. "He's protective. He should be more worried about himself. His political ambitions hang by a thread." The casual threat wasn't lost on Lyra. "Our agreement doesn't involve my brother." Nathaniel's smile never reached his eyes. "Everything involves everyone, Mrs. Rothwell." The way he said her new name sent a chill through her. Later, as the reception wound down, Lyra found a moment alone with Marcus on the veranda overlooking the ocean. "I don't trust him," Marcus said without preamble. "This whole arrangement stinks of something beyond business." "I'm aware," Lyra replied. "But it's done now." Marcus gripped the railing. "His aunt cornered me earlier. She mentioned something about old debts being settled, and not financial ones." "What did she mean?" "I don't know, but there you are." Nathaniel's voice cut through their conversation as he stepped onto the veranda. "The car's waiting. It's time to leave for Newport." Marcus straightened, squaring his shoulders. "Take care of my sister." "She's a Rothwell now," Nathaniel replied. "She'll want for nothing. Except freedom," Lyra thought as she hugged her brother goodbye. The drive to Newport took place in silence, Nathaniel working on his tablet while Lyra watched the coastline blur past. The Rothwell estate appeared on the horizon, a sprawling mansion overlooking the Atlantic, its windows glowing against the twilight sky. "Your things have been moved to the east wing," Nathaniel said as the car pulled into the circular drive. "My quarters are in the west. We'll share common areas when necessary for appearances." Lyra nodded, relieved at the arrangement, yet strangely disappointed. "And tonight?" "The honeymoon suite has been prepared." His tone remained businesslike. "We'll need to use the same room until the staff gossip dies down." Inside, the mansion was a study in old money, antiques, oil paintings, Persian rugs. A housekeeper showed them to the master suite, where champagne and roses created the illusion of a romantic wedding night. Once alone, Nathaniel loosened his tie. "You should change. There's a bathroom through there." Lyra gathered her night clothes from a suitcase and retreated to the bathroom. When she emerged in a modest silk nightgown, Nathaniel had removed his jacket and shoes but remained otherwise dressed. "I won't touch you," he said simply. "That wasn't part of our agreement for tonight." Lyra slipped under the covers on her side of the vast bed. "Then why the pretense of sharing a room?" "Because marriages, even arrangements like ours, have expectations." He poured himself a glass of scotch. "The staff would talk if we separated immediately." He moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit ocean, his profile sharp against the darkness. "Why me?" Lyra asked suddenly. "There must have been simpler ways to get revenge on my father." Nathaniel turned, surprise briefly crossing his features. "You know, then." "I suspected. Now I'm certain." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Perhaps you're more perceptive than your father gave you credit for." "That doesn't answer my question." Nathaniel set down his glass and approached the bed, stopping several feet away. "Some wounds require specific remedies, Mrs. Rothwell. Your father took something precious from me. Now I have something precious of his." In the silence that followed, their gazes held, predator and prey, captor and captive. Or so she thought, until his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing something unexpected beneath the cold exterior: pain. Morning light streamed through the windows of the honeymoon suite, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs. Lyra woke to find herself alone in the massive bed, the sheets on Nathaniel's side already cold. A note on his pillow simply read, "Business in New York. Return tonight. Car at your disposal. NR." Even his handwriting was precise and controlled. Lyra dressed and explored the estate, finding it as elegant as it was empty. The staff maintained a respectful distance, addressing her as Mrs. Rothwell with practiced deference. In the East Wing, she discovered her belongings had been meticulously arranged, her books alphabetized, her clothes color-coded in the walk-in closet. The library became her sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed first editions and rare manuscripts. A grand piano stood by the windows overlooking the Atlantic. Lyra ran her fingers over the keys, surprised to find it perfectly tuned. "He had it serviced last week," a voice said from the doorway. Lyra turned to find Vivian Rothwell watching her. Nathaniel's aunt wore an impeccably tailored pantsuit, her silver hair swept into a chignon. "I didn't realize anyone else was here," Lyra said. "I have the cottage on the north side of the property." Vivian entered, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Nathaniel mentioned you play." "I used to. At Juilliard. Yet you never pursued it professionally." Lyra shrugged. "My father had other expectations. Men often do." Vivian's gaze was unsettlingly similar to her nephew's. "I recognized that gown your mother wore yesterday. Eleanor had exquisite taste." The mention of her mother's name surprised Lyra. "You knew her?" "We all knew each other once." Vivian ran her hand along the piano. "Before everything changed." "What happened between our families?" Lyra asked directly. Vivian studied her. "Nathaniel hasn't told you?" "He's told me nothing except that my father took something from him." "And that's why you're here," Vivian concluded. "Collateral damage in a war that began before you were born." "I'm not damaged," Lyra said firmly. "I made a choice." "Did you?" Vivian's smile held no warmth. "Or were you maneuvered into position like a chess piece?" Before Lyra could respond, Vivian checked her watch. "I have appointments in Providence. We'll talk again, Lyra Rothwell. Perhaps next time you'll play something for me." Alone again, Lyra sat at the piano and began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her fingers remembering what her mind wanted to forget. Music had always been her escape, the one place where expectations fell away. Hours later, as dusk settled over Newport, the sound of a car on the gravel driveway announced Nathaniel's return. Lyra remained in the library, continuing to play as footsteps approached. "Chopin," Nathaniel said from the doorway. "My father's favorite." Lyra's hand stilled. "I didn't know." "How could you?" He entered, loosening his tie. "I see you've met my aunt. She's direct." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Vivian has never bothered with pleasantries." "Did she give you the third degree?" "She mentioned my mother. Said they all knew each other once." Something flickered across Nathaniel's face, a brief crack in his composure. "The past is complicated." "So I'm learning." Lyra closed the piano. "Will you tell me about it?" "Not tonight." He checked his watch. "We have dinner reservations at the Chandler. Black tie. The Newport set will expect to see us." "More appearances," Lyra murmured. "Always." Dinner was an elaborate performance. They arrived at the exclusive restaurant in Nathaniel's Bentley, his hand at the small of her back as they entered. He introduced her to influential couples who cooed over the newlyweds. Lyra played her part, smiling, charming, the perfect society wife. Nathaniel surprised her by knowing her preferences, ordering the fish instead of meat, selecting a wine she actually enjoyed. When she questioned it, he simply said, "I make it my business to know details." The evening proceeded with practiced civility, but Lyra couldn't help noticing how Nathaniel rebuffed any mention of his father or the past. Each time, his jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly, his hand gripping his glass a fraction harder. Back at the estate, they again prepared for bed with careful distance. Lyra emerged from the bathroom in her nightgown to find Nathaniel at the window, tumbler of scotch in hand, still fully dressed except for his jacket and tie. "You played your role well tonight," he said without turning. "I was raised for it." Lyra sat at the vanity, removing her earrings. The perfect society daughter. Is that why you gave up music? Now he did turn. To be what your father wanted? The question caught her off guard. "You've been investigating me." "I investigate everything that concerns me." "And do I concern you?" Nathaniel approached, stopping a careful distance away. "You're my wife now. That makes you my concern." "On paper only." "Papers have power, Lyra. They define the fall of my family and the rise of yours." He set down his glass. "They're defining us now." Something in his tone made her look up. Their eyes met in the mirror, hers questioning, his unreadable. "Tomorrow I return to New York," he said. "My apartment in Manhattan will be our official residence. You'll need to be there for certain functions. And the rest of the time? You may stay here if you prefer the solitude. Or use the Manhattan apartment when I'm traveling." He paused. "Your father's creditors have been notified of our marriage. The vultures will disperse for now." "How generous of you." "Don't mistake business for generosity." Nathaniel moved toward the bed. "This arrangement has terms, and I expect them to be honored." Lyra turned to face him directly. "And if I want to change the terms?" His expression hardened. "You're in no position to negotiate. Neither is my father, yet you're keeping his company afloat. Why not just let it collapse?" "Some falls should be slow," Nathaniel replied. "Deliberate. Like your revenge." He didn't deny it. "Get some sleep, Lyra. Your things will be moved to Manhattan tomorrow." As he turned away, Lyra noticed him absently rubbing his left wrist, where she had glimpsed the scar during dinner. Acting on impulse, she reached out and caught his hand. "What happened?" she asked, her fingers brushing over the raised tissue. The moment her skin touched his, something electric passed between them, a current of sensation that made Lyra gasp and Nathaniel go completely still. Their eyes met, both startled by the unexpected connection. For a heartbeat, Nathaniel's careful mask slipped, revealing raw emotion underneath, vulnerability and recognition that seemed to shock him as much as it did her. His pupils dilated, his breath caught. Then, deliberately, he removed the wedding band from his finger. The simple action seemed to require immense effort, as if breaking a spell. He placed the ring on the bedside table, his movements suddenly less certain. "We should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Separately. I'll use one of the guest rooms. But the staff will manage their disappointment." He gathered his things quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Good night, Lyra." After he left, Lyra stared at her hand, still feeling the lingering warmth where their skin had connected. Whatever had passed between them had affected him enough to abandon their carefully constructed pretense. And for the first time since her engagement, Lyra felt something other than resignation, a dangerous spark of curiosity about the man she had married, and the unexpected power of a simple touch. The Manhattan penthouse surprised Lyra. Unlike the Newport Estate's old-world opulence, Nathaniel's Central Park residence was sleek and modern, glass, steel, and minimalist furnishings. Yet personal touches were notably absent. No photographs, no mementos, nothing to suggest the space was actually lived in rather than staged. "The East Wing is yours," Nathaniel said, gesturing toward a hallway. "I've had it renovated to include a music room." A month had passed since their wedding night, and they had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Nathaniel spent most days at his office downtown and many evenings at business functions where Lyra played the role of devoted wife. They maintained separate bedrooms, careful not to repeat the unexpected moment in Newport. "Thank you," Lyra said, genuinely surprised by the thoughtfulness of including a music room. It's practical. Keeps your playing from disturbing my work. His tone was dismissive, but something in his eyes suggested there was more to the gesture. Life as Mrs. Rothwell came with rigid expectations. Charity boards sought her membership. Social invitations flooded in. Fashion designers offered to dress her. Lyra navigated it all with the poise her upbringing had instilled, while Nathaniel watched with detached approval. They rarely spoke about anything meaningful. He never mentioned his father or the past. She never asked about his business dealings. A careful détente maintained by mutual avoidance. Until the afternoon, Nathaniel received an urgent call during their lunch. "I need to deal with this," he said, already heading toward his office. "Order whatever you want for dinner. I'll be working late." Lyra nodded, used to his abrupt departures. But this time, he left in such haste that his office door remained ajar. She hesitated only briefly before approaching. The sleek office was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment, with one exception, a framed photograph on his desk, facing away from the door. Peering in, Lyra saw stacks of financial reports and legal documents spread across his desk. A folder marked Harrington Industries, Acquisition Phase, lay open, revealing complex diagrams of her father's company structure with sections highlighted in red. Curiosity overcoming caution, Lyra slipped into the office, examining the papers. The documents outlined a systematic plan to acquire controlling interest in Harrington Industries through shell companies and proxy investors, culminating in a complete takeover. The final phase was scheduled for execution in 3 months, exactly when their 1-year marriage contract would be nearing its end. Her hands trembling, Lyra reached for the photograph on the desk. It showed a younger Nathaniel standing beside an older man with the same gray eyes, his father, Richard Rothwell. They stood in front of a building with Rothwell Investments on the sign, both smiling with genuine happiness that seemed foreign on the face of the man she'd married. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel's voice from the doorway made her jump. He stood watching her, his expression dangerously calm. The door was open. "So you decided to go through my private papers?" He entered slowly, like a predator circling prey. Lyra lifted her chin. "You're planning to destroy my father's company. I made no secret of my intentions toward your father. But you never mentioned a specific plan." She gestured to the documents. "Or a timeline that coincides exactly with our arrangement." Nathaniel closed the folder with deliberate care. Business and personal matters often align. This isn't business. It's calculated revenge. His eyes narrowed. "You knew what this marriage was when you agreed to it." "I knew it was a transaction. I didn't know it was part of a master plan to dismantle my family." Lyra's voice shook. "What happens when you're done with us? When there's nothing left to take?" Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a flicker of what might have been uncertainty. "That's not your concern. It became my concern when I signed the marriage license." Lyra stepped closer, anger overriding caution. "You're using me as a pawn in your vendetta." "Your father used you first," Nathaniel countered. "He offered you up to save himself. And you accepted because it fit your revenge fantasy." The truth of it hit her fully. Is that what that night in Newport was about? Did you realize you were actually feeling something for the daughter of your enemy and panic? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic. And you're being a coward." The word hung between them. "If you want revenge, take it. But don't hide behind this sham marriage." "It's not that simple." "Explain it to me, then." Lyra challenged. "Tell me what my father did that justifies all this." For a moment, Nathaniel seemed on the verge of answering. Then his phone rang again, shattering the tension. He checked the screen, his expression hardening. "This discussion is over," he said coldly. "I have a crisis at the Tokyo office." "Of course you do." Lyra backed toward the door. "Heaven forbid you actually face something personal instead of hiding behind your business empire." She left before he could respond, retreating to her wing of the apartment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Phoenix. "Alive? Haven't heard from you in days." Lyra hesitated, then replied, "Need to talk. Meet me at the Met tomorrow? 2 p.m. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had always been Lyra's refuge in the city. The next afternoon, she wandered through the musical instruments exhibition, finding comfort in the craftsmanship of antique pianos and violins. "You look terrible," Phoenix said, appearing beside her. "Trouble in paradise?" Paradise was never part of the arrangement. Lyra led her friend to a quiet corner. "I found something in Nathaniel's office." He's planning to take over my father's company completely. Phoenix raised an eyebrow. Is this surprising? The man practically radiates vengeance. There's more to it. Lyra lowered her voice. Something happened between our families years ago. Something no one will tell me about. Have you asked your father directly? He deflects every time I bring it up. Phoenix considered this. What about that aunt? Vivian, you said she knew your mother. She's attending the museum benefit tonight. Lyra had nearly forgotten the gala where she was expected to appear as Nathaniel's wife. But why would she tell me anything? Because women like her love dropping bombs that explode other people's lives. Phoenix squeezed her hand. Be careful, Ly. You might not want to know the truth. The benefit was a glittering affair in the Temple of Dender. Lyra arrived separately from Nathaniel, who had texted that he would meet her there. She wore a midnight blue gown that complemented her dark hair and pale skin, a gift from her husband that had arrived that morning with a terse note. For tonight. She spotted Vivian holding court with museum patrons, elegant in black with a single strand of pearls. When their eyes met, the older woman excused herself and approached. Mrs. Rothwell, Vivian greeted her. Navigating the sharks alone tonight. Nathaniel's running late. Lyra accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you. About the mysterious past your husband won't discuss? Vivian's directness was startling. I wondered when you'd come asking. They moved to a quieter spot near an ancient Egyptian column. Vivian studied Lyra with shrewd eyes. You truly don't know, do you? She finally said. About your mother and my brother-in-law. Lyra's heart skipped. My mother and Richard Rothwell. They were in love once, before she met your father. Vivian sipped her champagne. Harrison Harrington was already wealthy, already connected. Richard was just building his firm. What happened? Eleanor chose security over passion. Or so we thought. Vivian's gaze turned distant. Until the rumors started that you might not be Harrison's daughter. The champagne glass nearly slipped from Lyra's fingers. That's impossible. Is it? Vivian raised an eyebrow. Harrison certainly thought it possible. It's why he kept you so isolated, why he watched you so carefully. You have Richard's musical talent, his eyes. You're lying. But even as she said it, Lyra remembered her father's reaction whenever she mentioned her mother, his tight control over her life. I have no reason to lie. Vivian's voice softened slightly. But I do wonder if my nephew knows the full story. If he's considered that in his quest to destroy Harrison Harrington, he might be destroying the only living connection to his father. Before Lyra could process this revelation, she felt a presence behind her. Nathaniel stood there, handsome in his tuxedo, his expression unreadable as he looked between his aunt and his wife. Filling in the blanks, Aunt Vivian? He asked, his voice deceptively light. Someone had to, Vivian replied, unperturbed. Your wife deserves to know why she's wearing your ring. As Vivian glided away to rejoin her group, Lyra stared at Nathaniel, seeing him through new eyes. The possibility that she might be Richard Rothwell's daughter changed everything about their arrangement, about his revenge. Did you know? She whispered. Nathaniel's face revealed nothing. Let's not do this here. Did you know? She repeated louder. His hand closed around her arm, gentle but firm. Not here, Lyra. Please. The please surprised her enough that she allowed him to guide her toward the exit, away from curious eyes. Outside, his driver waited with the car. Once inside the privacy of the back seat, Lyra turned to him. Answer me. Did you marry me because you think I'm Richard Rothwell's daughter? Nathaniel's expression finally cracked, revealing something raw underneath. No, he said quietly. I married you because I was certain you weren't. What does that mean? Lyra demanded as their car navigated through Manhattan's nighttime traffic. You were certain I wasn't his daughter? Nathaniel stared straight ahead. My father kept detailed journals. He wrote about your mother, about their relationship. When it ended, when she married Harrison. His jaw tightened. And about the timing of your birth. And the dates don't align. Eleanor was already with Harrison when you were conceived. He finally looked at her. You're a Harrington by blood. Relief and disappointment warred within Lyra. Relief that her identity wasn't a lie. Disappointment that the revelation hadn't ended this charade. Why would Vivian say otherwise? My aunt has her own agenda. Nathaniel loosened his tie. She never approved of my plans for Harrison. You mean your revenge, Lyra corrected. What exactly did my father do? I deserve to know. Nathaniel's expression darkened. He destroyed my father, fabricated evidence of fraud, turned clients and investors against Rothwell Investments, then swooped in to buy the remains at pennies on the dollar. That's business, not personal. It became personal when my father put a gun to his head. The raw pain in his voice startled her. I found him in his study, 16 years old, and I found my father with half his head gone and a note explaining how Harrison Harrington had systematically ruined him. Lyra felt sick. I'm sorry, but what? You think I should forgive and forget? Move on. Nathaniel laughed bitterly. I spent 15 years rebuilding what your father destroyed, planning how to return the favor. Everything I've done has been leading to this moment, including marrying me. Yes. No hesitation, no softening. The final piece. Taking what Harrison Harrington values most. And when you've taken everything, what then? Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. I don't know. The honesty surprised her. For the first time, she glimpsed the emptiness behind his revenge. A man who had dedicated his entire adult life to a single purpose, with no plan for after. They arrived at the penthouse in strained silence. In the elevator, Lyra studied her husband's profile, the tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled posture. She had married a stranger bent on destroying her family, yet she couldn't deny the connection that had sparked between them in Newport. Nathaniel, she said as they entered the apartment. Revenge won't bring your father back. His eyes flashed. Don't presume to know what I need. I know emptiness when I see it. I've lived with it my whole life. Playing the victim doesn't suit you, Lyra. Neither does playing the villain suit you. She stepped closer. I saw your face when we touched that night. Whatever this is between us, there is nothing between us except a legal document. His voice hardened. Don't mistake arrangement for affection. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Then why did you run that night? Why have you been avoiding being alone with me since? Instead of answering, Nathaniel turned away. It's late. We both need sleep. You're a coward, Lyra said to his back. He stopped. Careful. You talk about revenge and justice, but you're afraid to face something real. She pressed on, reckless with frustration. Something you didn't plan and can't control. Nathaniel turned slowly. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then show me I'm wrong. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hand coming up to cradle her face with unexpected gentleness. For a heartbeat, they remained frozen, her challenge hanging between them, his touch a question neither had expected. Then his lips found hers. Unlike their wedding kiss, this was no performance. Nathaniel kissed her with barely restrained hunger, as if breaking through a dam. Lyra responded with equal fervor, her hands gripping his lapels, pulling him closer. The electricity she'd felt at his touch in Newport multiplied tenfold. Every point of contact between them seemed to burn. His hand at her waist, her fingers in his hair, their bodies pressed together as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, shock registered on Nathaniel's face. The carefully maintained mask had shattered, revealing raw desire and something that looked alarmingly like fear. This changes nothing, he said, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. It changes everything, Lyra countered, her own voice unsteady. You feel it too. Nathaniel stepped back, running a hand through his hair. What I feel is irrelevant to our arrangement. Is it? Lyra moved toward him, but he retreated further. What if there's more to this than revenge and obligation? There can't be. His tone was final. Don't build a fantasy around one moment of weakness. The dismissal cut deep. Is that what this was? Weakness. A mistake, he amended. One that won't happen again. Lyra watched him rebuild his walls, brick by emotional brick. You can't keep running from this. Watch me. Nathaniel straightened his jacket. I have work to finish. Good night, Lyra. Alone in her room, Lyra touched her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. Need to see you. Tomorrow, my office. 10 a.m. Urgent. The next morning, Lyra arrived at Marcus's Midtown office to find him pacing anxiously. Her brother had recently launched his political consulting firm, and the space still smelled of fresh paint and new furniture. You look terrible, she said by way of greeting. Marcus didn't smile. Dad's in trouble. Serious trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind that ends in prison. Marcus pulled up documents on his tablet. Rothwell Financial is about to release evidence that Dad has been running a Ponzi scheme through one of his investment arms. The paperwork is already with the SEC. Lyra sank into a chair. That can't be true. It is. I've seen the evidence myself. Marcus looked defeated. I confronted him this morning. He didn't even deny it. Does Nathaniel know you're telling me this? Of course not. But you needed to be warned. Marcus knelt before her. Lie, this goes beyond business rivalry. Your husband is systematically destroying Dad. And once this hits the news, my marriage will be the least of our concerns, she finished. Exactly. Dad's facing federal charges. Our family name will be toxic. My political aspirations are done. Marcus squeezed her hand. But you can still get out. Your prenup has an infidelity clause, right? If Nathaniel cheats, he won't. Of that, Lyra was oddly certain. Then make him. Marcus's eyes hardened. Or fake evidence. Anything to trigger the escape clause before this bomb drops. I can't do that. Why not? He's using you, Ly. You're just collateral damage in his revenge plot. Those words echoed as Lyra left Marcus's office. Walking through Central Park, she tried to reconcile the ruthless businessman orchestrating her father's downfall with the man whose kiss had revealed such unexpected vulnerability. By the time she reached the penthouse, she'd made her decision. She would confront Nathaniel directly, demand an explanation about the SEC filing, try one last time to understand the man she'd married. The penthouse was silent when she arrived. Nathaniel's office door stood partially open, light spilling into the hallway. Steeling herself, Lyra approached. Nathaniel, we need to talk about, she stopped short. The office was empty, but his desk drawers had been left open, papers scattered as if he'd been searching for something urgently. The wall safe behind his desk, which she'd never seen opened, stood ajar. Curiosity drew her forward. Inside the safe, she found folders of legal documents, stacks of cash, and a small velvet box containing what appeared to be his mother's jewelry. But what caught her eye was a blood-stained photograph partially hidden beneath the other contents. Carefully, she extracted it. The photo showed her mother, Eleanor, much younger, laughing as she sat on a park bench. But the image was marred by what appeared to be dried blood splatter across one corner. Your father kept that in his desk. Nathaniel's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, watching her with unreadable eyes. Why is it covered in blood? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because it was on his desk when he shot himself. Nathaniel's voice was flat. The last thing he saw was your mother's face. Lyra carefully returned the photo to the safe. You're filing SEC charges against my father. Yes. When were you going to tell me? I wasn't. No apology, no justification. Were you ever going to tell me anything? Anger rose in her throat. Or was I just supposed to stand by and watch while you destroyed my family? That was the arrangement. And last night, was that part of the arrangement too? Something flickered in his eyes. A complication. Nothing more. You're lying. Lyra stepped closer. To me, to yourself. Think what you want. Nathaniel moved to his desk, began reorganizing the scattered papers. The SEC filing happens tomorrow. Your father will be arrested by week's end. The press has already been notified. And our marriage? What happens to that? Nathaniel paused. That depends on you. On me. Lyra laughed bitterly. How generous to give me a choice now, when everything's already decided. You always had a choice, Lyra. His voice softened slightly. You still do. The tenderness in his tone, appearing so unexpectedly after his coldness, broke something inside her. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I can't pretend this is just business when we both know it's not. For a moment, Nathaniel seemed on the verge of saying something important. Then his phone rang. The special tone he'd assigned to his executive team. His expression shuddered, closed again. I need to take this, he said, as if their conversation hadn't been happening at all. Lyra backed toward the door. Of course you do. She returned to her room and packed a small overnight bag, tears blurring her vision. The kiss they'd shared, the connection she'd felt, all meaningless against the weight of 15 years of planned revenge. Phoenix answered on the first ring when Lyra called. I need that key you gave me, Lyra said, her voice breaking, and a place to stay for a while. My door's always open, Phoenix replied without hesitation. Come now. Lyra left without saying goodbye, without leaving a note. As the elevator descended to the lobby, she removed her wedding ring and tucked it into her purse. a small act of defiance against a marriage that had been nothing but a calculated move in a game she hadn't known she was playing. Outside, rain had begun to fall on Manhattan, matching the tears that finally spilled down her cheeks. Phoenix's Brooklyn loft offered a stark contrast to the cold perfection of Nathaniel's penthouse. Art covered the walls, books overflowed from shelves, and mismatched furniture created a lived-in warmth that Lyra had nearly forgotten existed. 3 days, and he hasn't called, Phoenix observed, setting a mug of coffee before Lyra. Not what I expected from the controlling billionaire type. Lyra stared out the rain-streaked window. He's probably too busy destroying my father to notice I'm gone. The headlines had been relentless. Harrington Financial under SEC investigation. Ponzi scheme allegations rock Wall Street. Harrington empire crumbling. Harrison Harrington had disappeared from public view, his lawyer making terse statements about cooperating with authorities. Have you spoken to Marcus? Phoenix asked. He's in damage control mode. Lyra's voice was hollow, trying to distance himself professionally before his career is completely obliterated. Phoenix sat beside her. What about you? What do you want? The question hung in the air. What did she want? For most of her life, Lyra had been defined by others' expectations, her father's, society's, and most recently, Nathaniel's. I don't know, she admitted, but I need answers about my mother. Phoenix raised an eyebrow. What kind of answers? Lyra hesitated, then retrieved a small wooden box from her bag. I found these in my father's study years ago. Letters between my mother and Richard Rothwell. Phoenix's eyes widened. And you kept this from Nathaniel? I only remembered them after Vivian mentioned their relationship. Lyra opened the box, revealing a stack of faded letters tied with ribbon. I never read them before. It felt like an invasion of privacy. And now I need to know the truth. The letters revealed a love affair more complex than Vivian had suggested. Eleanor and Richard had been deeply in love, but their relationship ended abruptly when Harrison Harrington entered the picture with his wealth and connections. She seems conflicted, Phoenix noted as they read. Like she married your father out of obligation, not love. The final letter, dated just months before Lyra's birth, made both women gasp. I will always cherish what might have been, Richard wrote. Take care of yourself and the child that could have been ours in another life. Lyra's hands trembled. This doesn't make sense. Nathaniel said the timing proved I'm a Harrington. Unless he lied, Phoenix suggested, or didn't have all the information. I need to know for sure. Lyra made a sudden decision. There's only one way to find out. 3 days later, Lyra sat in a sterile waiting room at a private medical clinic, Phoenix beside her for moral support. The DNA test had been Phoenix's idea, a way to settle the question of paternity once and for all. Results take weeks, Phoenix reminded her. I know, but at least. Mrs. Rothwell. Both women looked up as Vivian entered the waiting room, elegant as ever in a tailored pantsuit. How did you know I'd be here? Lyra asked, stunned. I know everything that happens in my family's orbit. Vivian sat across from them. Including your disappearing act from Nathaniel's apartment. Is he looking for me? Something like compassion crossed Vivian's face. In his way, though he'd never admit it. What does that mean? It means my nephew has been impossible to work with since you left. Distracted, irritable. Vivian glanced at the clinic's logo. A DNA test won't tell you what you really want to know. And what's that? Lyra challenged. Whether you've fallen in love with the man who's destroying your father. The bluntness of the statement left Lyra speechless. What do you want, Mrs. Rothwell? Vivian pressed. Answers. Truth. Lyra hesitated. And for the destruction to stop. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps you should know that Nathaniel has halted the SEC proceedings. Phoenix and Lyra exchanged shocked glances. Why would he do that? Lyra asked. He claims it's strategic. I think it's something else entirely. Vivian stood. The question is, what will you do with this information? After Vivian left, Phoenix turned to Lyra. You're going back to him, aren't you? Before Lyra could answer, her phone rang with a call from Marcus. Lie, it's Dad. Her brother's voice was tight with panic. He's in the hospital. They're saying heart attack, but it's bad. You need to come now. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Lyra rushed toward the cardiac unit, Phoenix following close behind. Marcus met them outside their father's room, his face haggard. How is he? Lyra asked. Stable, but critical. Marcus hugged her briefly. The doctors say the stress triggered it. Can I see him? Marcus nodded, then added quietly, "There's something else you should know. Nathaniel Rothwell is here." "What? What?" "He arrived about an hour ago. He's been making calls, arranging for specialists." Marcus looked confused. The head of cardiology is personally overseeing Dad's care because of him. Lyra entered the room to find her father pale against the hospital sheets, monitors beeping steadily. And beside the bed, standing with his back to the door, was Nathaniel. He turned at her entrance, their eyes meeting across the room. The careful mask he always wore had slipped, revealing exhaustion and something that looked remarkably like relief at seeing her. "Lyra," he said simply. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I came to deliver this." He held up a folder. "Documents withdrawing all charges against your father." "I don't understand." Nathaniel glanced at Harrison's unconscious form. "Neither do I." He moved toward the door, pausing beside her. "You look tired. You should rest." "Nathaniel, we can talk later." His professional tone had returned, but his eyes betrayed more. "I'll have the car wait for you." As he left, Lyra noticed something different about him, a certain heaviness to his movements, as if he too carried a weight he couldn't explain. Before she could process this, an alarm blared from her father's monitors. Medical staff rushed in, shouting terms Lyra couldn't comprehend as they fought to stabilize Harrison. In the chaos, Marcus pulled her into the hallway. "What was that about? Why would Rothwell drop the charges now?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted, watching through the glass as doctors worked frantically on their father. "But I think something's changed." Outside the hospital, snow began to fall on New York City, unusually early for November, transforming the urban landscape into something almost magical. Lyra watched the flakes through the window, wondering if perhaps, like the snow, people too could transform when the conditions were right. Snow continued to fall as Lyra left the hospital hours later. Her father had stabilized again, though he remained unconscious. Marcus had insisted on staying overnight, giving Lyra a chance to process everything that had happened. Nathaniel's Blacktown car waited at the curb, just as he'd promised. The driver opened the door without a word, revealing the car's empty interior. "Where is Mr. Rothwell?" Lyra asked. "He asked me to take you wherever you wish to go, ma'am," the driver replied. Lyra hesitated only briefly. "The penthouse, please." Manhattan glittered beneath its fresh blanket of snow as they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. Lyra watched the city lights reflect on the East River, her mind racing with questions. Why had Nathaniel withdrawn the charges? What had changed? The penthouse was dark when she arrived, showing no signs of Nathaniel's presence. Lyra moved through the familiar spaces, noting small changes. A coffee cup left on the counter, documents spread across the dining table, signs that the meticulous order had slipped in her absence. In the living room, she found his suit jacket draped carelessly over a chair, so unlike his usual precision. When she picked it up to hang it properly, a small velvet box fell from the pocket. Inside was her wedding ring, the one she'd left behind when she fled to Phoenix's apartment. "I had it resized." Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept in days. He looked both powerful and vulnerable, a contradiction Lyra was beginning to recognize as his true nature. "Why?" she asked simply. "It looked uncomfortable on your finger." He entered slowly, keeping distance between them. "How is your father?" "Stable. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." Lyra studied him. "You withdrew the charges." It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel nodded. "The SEC investigation will continue, but without my company's evidence, they have little to work with." "Why now?" "After 15 years of planning your revenge." Nathaniel moved to the window, gazing out at the snowy cityscape. "I received a call from Cambridge while you were gone. A specialist I'd hired to analyze my father's financial records from the period before his death. And it appears I was wrong." The admission seemed physically painful for him. Harrison Harrington didn't fabricate the fraud evidence. "My father actually did misappropriate client funds." Lyra took a step toward him. "Nathaniel, don't say you're sorry." His voice hardened. "I've heard enough condolences for one lifetime." "Then what happens now? To us?" Nathaniel turned, his expression unreadable. "That depends on the other revelation that came to light." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, handing it to Lyra. It was a DNA test result. "I had Vivian collect samples weeks ago. Your hairbrush, my father's preserved tissue sample." His voice was carefully neutral. I needed to know before proceeding with my plans. Lyra's hands trembled as she opened the document. You knew all along that I might be Richard's daughter? I suspected. Harrison's overprotectiveness, your musical talent, certain physical similarities. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. But I convinced myself it was impossible, that it would be too cruel a twist of fate. Lyra scanned the results, her heart pounding. Negative paternal match, she read aloud. I'm not Richard's daughter. No, you're Harrison Harrington's child, through and through. Relief and something like disappointment washed through her. Then why stop your revenge? Why withdraw the charges if I'm not connected to your father? Nathaniel moved closer, his careful control slipping. Because revenge stopped matching the moment you walked out that door. The admission hung in the air between them. When I thought my father was the victim, revenge gave my life purpose, he continued. Now that I know the truth, that he was flawed, that he made terrible mistakes, I'm left with nothing but 15 years of wasted hatred. Not wasted, Lyra said softly. It brought you to me. Something broke in Nathaniel's expression. He closed the distance between them, his hand cradling her face with unexpected tenderness. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to want something for myself instead of for revenge. We can learn together. Lyra leaned into his touch. If that's what you want. Instead of answering, Nathaniel kissed her. Not with the desperate hunger of their first real kiss, but with gentle exploration, as if discovering something precious and fragile. When they separated, breathless, Lyra noticed snowflakes catching in the dim light from the window. It's beautiful, she whispered. Yes. But Nathaniel wasn't looking at the snow. Later that night, as they lay tangled together in the master bedroom that had previously been just for show, Lyra traced the scar on Nathaniel's wrist. I found him, Nathaniel said quietly. After he shot himself. I tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. I didn't know what else to do, so I just held his hand until it went cold. Lyra pressed her lips to the scar. You were just a boy, and then I was a man with only one purpose. His fingers threaded through her hair. Until I met you. What happens now? With my father's company, we rebuild it. Legitimately this time. Nathaniel's voice grew sleepy. Together, if you want. And us? This marriage of convenience. Nathaniel pulled her closer. There's nothing convenient about what I feel for you, Lyra Rothwell. Spring came early to New York that year. In the Berkshire Mountains, a small gathering witnessed Nathaniel and Lyra Rothwell renew their vows in a ceremony that bore little resemblance to their first wedding. This time, there were no photographers, no society guests, no performance for appearance's sake. Just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, choosing each other not out of obligation or revenge, but out of love that had flourished despite every obstacle. Harrison Harrington watched from his wheelchair, older and humbled by his brush with death and legal consequences. Marcus stood beside him, rebuilding his own life with a newfound appreciation for truth over ambition. As Nathaniel slipped the resized ring back onto Lyra's finger, their hands touched and lingered, remembering the first electric connection that had changed everything. From arrangement to affection, she whispered, echoing his dismissive words from months before. Nathaniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, something once rare but now increasingly common. From revenge to redemption, he corrected. When they kissed, sealed not by a contract but by choice, the guests applauded. But neither Lyra nor Nathaniel noticed, too lost in the touch that had once sparked an unlikely journey from darkness into light.